mostly what we'll capture. Yep, there's proof. If you don't want your face on screen, even though it'll be tiny, go ahead and turn off your camera. But mostly the presentation that Emily is about to give will be showing anyway. But we thought it would be great to keep this as a resource for those who might not be able to make it. So that's a housekeeping announcement. Another housekeeping announcement is as we go, and then I'll get to talking about Emily, but you are very welcome to post your questions in the chat window, or you're welcome to raise your hand. You can do it through, there's a way to sort of raise your hand on the Zoom interface, or if you're not comfortable with that, you can just unmute and ask questions because it's a pretty small group. But sometimes it's easier to just put your questions in the chat. So those are the technical details. But it is my great pleasure to welcome Emily Rauch. She is the Native Plants Program Manager at Hilltop Hanover Farm. As an avid but perpetually amateur gardener myself, who has tried as much as possible to shift everything in my yard to native plants, I have been tremendously impressed with what Hilltop Hanover Farm has been doing over the last few years in terms of growing native plants that are so native, they're actually, and Emily can explain this better, but they're very specific to our particular ecoregion, and we are denizens of Ecoregion 59. If you want to have t-shirts made or brag to your friends in other parts of the country. But again, Emily can explain that better. But Hilltop Hanover Farm has really expanded their offerings in terms of the native plants that you can buy there. They're also incredibly affordable compared to getting them elsewhere. I spend way too much money there, but I always get a good deal. So I love what they do. And I think it's something that we're all thinking more and more about, is how to support the ecosystem, how to support the pollinators, who in turn support us by helping food production. And just we're very, very happy to have Emily here. I'm personally thrilled. Just to give you 2 seconds of background on Emily, she has a certificate in the Connecticut Master Gardener Program. And then she also has a certificate from the New York Botanical Gardens Plant Production and Greenhouse Management Program. So unlike me, she is not an amateur. She's now working on her New York Botanical Garden botany certificate as well. And she's been working at Hilltop Hanover Farms for a few years and has really gotten this program off the ground. So I will let her explain more about it, but thank you so much for joining us for this. And yeah, please feel free to ask as many questions as you'd like. And then one other thing I'd like to mention is, as a sort of follow-up to this program, we also will be offering a tour, an actual in-person live tour at Hilltop Hanover Farms on June 11th at 10 a.m. That's a Saturday. So that's sort of, we wanted to do an in-person, hands-on, go see the amazing plants for yourself portion as well. So what we'll do is we will send out a reminder about that closer to June 11th. And what I would ask is, if you would like to do that, and that's free as well as this is, but if you would like to do that, please put yourself on the Jug Tavern's email list. So you can do that at jugtavern.org, and that way we'll have your email and we can notify you when we get closer to the time of that event. But that's a way to see in action all of the amazing things that Emily will tell you about this evening. So with that, I will hand it over to Emily. And Emily, thank you so much. We're all very excited.
Hi, and thank you. Sounds like a great organization you guys have there, and a lot of great programs you do. That's really great.
You're our favorite.
I'm going to share the screen now. Let's see if I can get this up and running. Share. Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm going to start. All right, Margaret already sort of introduced me, so I don't need to tell you my whole background, but what I do want to explain is how I started growing native plants. So I was always in the food industry. So naturally, when my kids were little, I actually started growing food in my backyard. And my garden got bigger and bigger. and I started taking more and more classes and became more and more interested in gardening. And eventually, when I was doing my Master Gardener program, I did an internship at Scalzi Riverwalk Nature Preserve in Stanford, which is actually, it's like a park in the middle of an urban setting. And what we did is we used to every single day cut down invasives, and then eventually we would cut and cut and cut and cut over like every different kind. And eventually we would also grow native plants, and then we would replace the invasives with the native plants. And so over 7 years, the woman who was running the program has done it for over 7 years. And what she noticed was that all the wildlife was coming back. So animals, birds, there were nesting birds that were nesting there that were that haven't been in that spotted in that area in a very long time. And so she noted, we all noticed that all the nature started coming back. And this is in an urban, oh shoot, I didn't mean to do that, sorry. And this is in an urban setting. So so I really got to see it in action. And so that's really where I started growing native plants, and I became very interested in doing it more and more. So full disclosure, I'm not a landscape designer, so I can't, I'm not gonna be talking about design, but I do love native plants, and I've grown a lot of them. I grow them all the time. And I just wanna explain to you why it's important to grow them. So let's start. So this is very interesting. This is Sarah Stein, who is one of the first people in this area to do this kind of ecological gardening back in 1993. So this is not a new thing. And as you can see, suburban development has, I'm just going to quote her, you can read it while I'm reading it. Suburban development has wrought habitat destruction on a grand scale. As these tracts expand, they increasingly squeeze the remaining natural ecosystems, fragment them, sever corridors by which plants and animals might refill the voids we have created. To reverse this process, to reconnect as many plant and animal species as we can, to rebuild intelligent suburban ecosystems requires a new kind of garden, new techniques of gardening, and a new kind of gardener. And this was back in 1993. So this was not this. She was like the grandmother of the movement, and she was. What was great about, I would suggest you read this book. She really does a good job explaining how it all happens in your yard. And she's a scientist, so for her observations, she made all the observations on her property, and she noticed that when she came in and they bulldozed everything basically, and then rebuilt the landscape in the normal way, all the life disappeared, and she never saw she didn't see anything anymore. And she was like, wow. So then she started putting back in the natural landscape that she took out, and she noticed, and this book catalogs everything that she did. Okay. Anyway, I suggest that you read it. She is the expert. And now we jump forward to, let's see, 2022 now. And Doug Talamay, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of him, he spearheaded this whole movement right now. And he's an entomologist from Maryland, I think University of Maryland. And this book, I suggest you all read it. He does a great job of telling everybody why this is so important. He's an entomologist, and he started also, there's a website, Homegrown National Park. I do have at the end of this slideshow, I have a list of all the websites you can take a picture of to see which sources that I like to look at. But what he found was that the insects are disappearing. And the main reason the insects are disappearing because we have no food for them. We're getting rid of, with urbanization, we're getting rid of all the plants. So we're going to talk about that throughout the slides of the rest of the presentation. Okay. So I want to introduce you to some of these topics and some buzzwords I want you to understand by the end. And I'm trying not to make it too complicated. It's a lot of information. And I basically showed you the how part from just what I have done in my own gardens because I've personally done it.
If you hold that, then I'll go.
Um,
You want to watch the game?
No, I just want to share.
So why native plants? Each one of these, I'm going to explain each one of the statements, so I'm not going to do it now. But for plant, insect, and animal populations are in decline. Biodiversity, which is one of the words we're going to go over, can help mitigate damage from climate change. Most land is privately owned and covered in lawn. Native plants directly feed our insect populations, which are an integral part of the food chain. And they're beautiful and easy. Now in this picture I put that picture in because that's a Christmas fern. I do planters, which I'm sure everybody does. And instead of putting in annuals, I'm starting to just put in native plants. And that has been there all summer. And that was actually just taken this fall. And it's still looking okay and it's fine. And actually at the Native Plant Center, they teach a lot of classes. They have a Go Native U.
Can you kill your
They teach a lot of classes on all kinds of things, anything related to native plants. And I took a native plant container course by Kim Eimerman, who's one of our local native plant people. She wrote this book, which is really great too. And she talks a lot about being able to just put them in planters if you don't have a yard. Okay, so our local flora populations are in decline because urbanization is interrupting and disrupting our habitats. A lot of deer browsing, everybody I'm sure knows about that. Our invasive species are outcompeting our local natives, and non-native insects are also bringing in disease, and we're losing a lot of our trees from that actually. Climate change, habitat loss, and degradation, especially forests and agricultural, emerge as the three most important stressors in insect population. That was from a science journal. I'm sure you all heard about the insect apocalypse article from the New York Times. They really are starting to see that we're losing our insect populations. So this is part of the reason why. This map, you can't really see it, but it shows that all of the white parts are all privately owned land. So 83% of the United States is privately owned. And what that means is that when insects and birds and animals want to move from one place to another, whether it's migration or just going to a pond to get water, if it's all private and everyone's digging up their properties, there's nowhere for them to go. It doesn't connect. There's no connection between all the land. So it disrupts all of their migration patterns and everything. And so what Doug Talamay and all of the native plant pushers, if you want to call us now, when you own land, you're the land steward of your own land. People think land stewards are just for public lands, but it's really private land. If all the land is going to be privately owned, then you need to be your own land steward and you need to treat it like a park and treat it well. And even on my property, I actually learned the hard way. When we first moved in, we had put up, there was some Belgian block in one area, but not in another. So along our driveway, and we put up, we continued it down the driveway, and we live across the street from a pond and then up a hill from a natural preserve area. And what we found was that the first spring after we put the Belgian block, the little turtles started going across our yard, and they would hit the Belgian block and then have nowhere to go, and they didn't know what to do. And so they turned and then went out into the street. It was like devastating. It was so horrible. So now we go out there every spring and we try and like put the turtles over, and they get to go walk to the pond. So that's what we're doing with our lands. We're really messing up nature. Okay, here's one of the first buzzwords, biodiversity. I'm sure everybody's heard it over and over again, but not really know what it is. It's taken me a while to really realize what it is. I just saw on another Zoom talk, Ohio State University actually Tending Nature, which was a really great series. This entomologist said biodiversity is the biological variety of life on Earth. It could be measured at the genetic, species, or ecosystem level. Starting big, the ecosystem level is everything with plants and animals and insects, all different kinds together. Then the species level are different species of plants or of animals or of insects. And then at the genetic level is within a species, there's biodiversity. And that's what we're doing with growing the plants at Hilltop. We're trying to have genetic diversity within the species of the plants. And I'll explain that later too. That's going to come up again. Okay, so let's go to the next size. Climate change. We have to have diverse plantings to ensure that some of them will survive. And I'm going to talk about that later also. So here we go. This is this is one of the reasons. The way that the American household is everybody wanted a big lawn. Well, we're finding that's not really such a great thing anymore. So it uses a huge amount of water, and a lot of people add fertilizers, and the fertilizers only hit 20 when they're using them. They only hit 25% of the targeted plants, and the rest of them get washed into our waterways. That's all the algae bloom that you see on all the ponds everywhere. That's what that is. It provides little or no habitat, and it is expensive keeping it up. And as you can see, I love the root picture. You'll see this in lots of other write-ups about this, but you see the turf grass has absolutely no roots. And then all the other plants have these extended roots. Also, it used to be that in our gardens, we didn't want insects. We always would spray pesticides, and only 2% of them reach the targeted plants. So where's the rest of it going? It's going everywhere, and it's killing everything. So now our new landscape, we want to grow plants for the insects. Roots are also super important because they stabilize the soil, they filter stormwater, decrease runoff, and sequester carbon. Okay, here's the big example. Which everybody knows about is everybody's trying to save the monarch butterfly. And here's another buzzword is the host plant. So I'm just using this one because everybody knows about it. The monarch butterfly eats the plants of the milkweed family, the Asclepiadaceae, in order to survive. They lay their eggs on the underside of the leaf, and when the babies hatch, they have their food, and then they start to eat the leaves right away, right when they hatch. So in order to not have the monarchs disappear, there's been a movement to plant milkweeds. There are many insects. This is called a specialist, the insect. There are a lot of different specialist insects. There's a lot of moths and butterflies and many, many specialist insects, and they evolved with each other. So the caterpillar and the plant co-evolved. They evolved with each other. So that's the only plant that caterpillar can eat. And so if we don't have the plant, we don't have the caterpillar. And I just put a little fun fact in there that milkweeds have toxins, and actually the caterpillar absorbs them and they're able to digest them, and then it makes them toxic to other predators so that they won't get eaten. I thought that was fun. So anyway, it's very important to have a lot of different plants, native plants, so that you can support a lot of different pollinators. Now, oh, wait, I think I missed one. Yeah. So there are many types of pollinators, and they're all important, and they all provide ecosystem services, which are they provide pollination, they're predatory bugs, they're food for other birds and animals, and they're decomposers. They do a lot of different things. But this is all these pictures you're going to see are all in my gardens. And I tried to only take pictures of flowers with insects on them. And there were a lot. Now that I've started paying attention, you need to wake up and start paying attention. I actually started to really look at my flowers in the last couple of years. And I've noticed that they do attract a lot of different insects. So this picture speaks for itself, the little chickadee. But if you see it at the bottom, a single pair of breeding chickadees must catch 7,500 caterpillars to rear one clutch of young. So this was Doug Talamay's big research, is he started researching actually caterpillars, birds eating caterpillars, and he realized how many caterpillars different trees supported. And actually he wrote a whole book on oak trees and how oak trees supported the most caterpillars out of all. So you can look that one up. I haven't read it yet, but I've heard it's amazing. Okay, why? So native plants provide pollen and nectar for a wide range of pollinators. The nectar is for energy. They basically feed them, and the pollen is for protein and fat. So as I said before, the insects provide all the ecosystem services that we need in order to survive in the food chain, basically. And they're increasing the genetics because they're going, the bees and the pollinators are going from flower to flower to flower and moving the pollen around. And we'll talk a lot about genetics later too. I'll explain more about that. Okay, so now we're into we did the why. I want to see if I missed anything on that. Oh, I do want to say that I'll talk about this later. It's okay. Okay, so now we're on to what are native plants. So native plants grow naturally in an area without human introduction. And there's a lot of debate about how long ago to look back for this. So there's a lot of people talking about how long ago, and that's just up for debate right now. But they have, the one thing that's important is that they have co-evolved with the local ecosystem, with local soils, climates, and local insects. And they're intricately connected to the living creatures around them. And without native plants, many insect species cannot survive, and they're an important part of the food chain. That's one big point that I'm trying to make tonight, which I hope you'll walk away with. So we're still on the what natives to plant. There's more of the plants. Actually, those are all at the farm, the Monarda, the Penstemon, and the Euthymia graminifolia, which is thin leaf goldenrod. So you want to plant a high quality pollinator habitat, preferably 70% native plants. And this next one's a little confusing. Be careful to keep in mind that climates are changing. So if you have 70% native plants, you have 30% to play around with. You can get all your favorites that you have, but just keep in mind that some of the exotic plants, if they're from the same climate area, they might like it here, and then they don't have any predators because they never evolved here, so they can get out of hand. And that happened to me once. I grew this one shrub. It was like a shrubby, I don't even remember the name of it, but all of a sudden I was driving down the street across the street from my house, and I was like, is that the same shrub that I planted in my yard? And it jumped, and it wasn't a native plant. So I was like kind of freaked out by that. I saw it in action. And so anyway, maybe the exotic and the fun plants can be from a more southern, like the southern border, like, Pennsylvania or Maryland, not too far away, because as climates actually warm up here, those plants are going to start moving north anyway. So in my garden, I have like Fothergilla, which is a shrub that is actually from further southern region, but that's my like fun plant. So anyway, you want a diverse mix of native perennials, shrubs, and trees. Trees are very important because they're the first to flower in the spring, and they provide food and pollen for emerging insects that were in hibernation or pupating. So trees are actually really important, and shrubs too. And then you want continuous blooms, so they're flowering all season long in order to feed everybody, even in the winter. Seeds and berries are super important in the winter. And we're going to talk about not cutting down your everything during the winter. And actually, in the opening, the first slide, I meant to say that the snow, the picture with the grass and the snow it's quite beautiful to have your garden up in the winter time. And then you want a diversity of blooms, different shapes, size, and color, like tubular flowers, like the penstemon and the monarda and lobelias, because they attract different insects and hummingbirds and long-tongued bees. And then you just want to attract a lot of different things to have lots of biodiversity on your property. Okay. So now you do quickly want to just see, if you're wet, dry, the soil, full sun, part shade. A lot of the native plants are very forgiving. So I have wetland plants in a dry area and they did fine. I have shade stuff in the sun. They're a lot easier than some of the other exotic plants. But right plant, right place is important. If you're going to put a tree or shrub right in front of your house, you want to give it, they need room to grow. I think people don't really understand that. When they buy it small and they're like, oh, that's such a cute tree and shrub. Well, they grow and they grow big. And we made that mistake too. We got 2 American hollies actually and put them in the front of our house, too close to the house. And we ended up having to pull them, which was really sad because they're tap rooted and they're not so easy to move around. And so they didn't do well. I couldn't move them. So we took them out and I put in Clethra, which is a much better fit for that spot. Okay, so more diverse offerings. I just wanted to show some of the different flower shapes. They're all different and they have different attractions for different pollinators. For example, the composite flower, actually which is in the sunflower family, and they're Asteraceae, and they provide landing pads for a lot of the bees. So they each have different kinds of construction to help the pollinator and attract the pollinator. Oops, wait, I skipped one. Okay, so you want to do, this is actually a garden that I just put in. And I wanted to just show this picture that it's a mix of perennial shrubs and trees, and it's called layering. And you'll hear that a lot. You want to do different layers. The whole point, I know it looks like there's mulch there, but that's only for like a year or two. Eventually I haven't used mulch in years, only when putting in new gardens, and I'll explain that later. But you want to do the lower layer, then the middle layer and the upper layer so that you have things blooming at different heights and different times, and then it will all fill in. And so you never have to use mulch ever again, which is great because it's not really that good for the garden and it's also expensive. So the trees and the blooms, I talked about that. Shrubs are an important understory. It also provides cover for the understory provides cover for animals to hide and to feel safe. And then and then the lower ones protect the soil. And actually, if you wanted to see, those are my fothergillas right there, actually. And then I have some Clethra. When in doubt, put Clethra in. It's a great shrub. I love it. It grows in sun and shade, and it's just a fabulous plant. And there's a witch hazel that I use as a tree in the corner. Okay, so this is kind of important. You need to know about the plant that you're going to buy, and you really should know before. Everyone gets excited when they go to the nursery and they just want to buy whatever's there. But sometimes you end up coming home with stuff, and I've done it millions of times, that aren't the right plants and not ones that you should have, that you're looking to have. So in order to get the plants you want for your ecological garden, you need to know what to look for. So you need to know the difference between a straight species and a cultivar. Cultivar meaning cultivated. That's humans have done that. And then you need to know what plant you're actually getting by knowing the correct name, meaning the botanical name. for example, mountain mint, we have 3 different kinds of mountain mint. So if you just go in and say, oh, I want mountain mint, really, which one is that? Is that Pigmanthum muticum or Pigmanthum virginianum or Pigmanthum tenuifolium? So the botanical name is actually more important than you think. And then you need to ask if the plant is seed grown and if it's grown locally. So seed grown, I will discuss more, and that's the genetics that I was talking about. And hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll know why that's important. And then also about you want to know whether it's grown locally, because if you're getting plants from nursery stock from, let's say, down south, they've never seen winter. So when they come up here, and they truck them up here and they put them in all the big stores, their phenology is going to be off. They're going to leaf out at different times. They're going to bloom at different times, and they might die because they'll leaf out in the middle of winter, and then we're going to have a freeze. And then also it's going to mess up all the insects because they're not going to know. Some of the flowers last longer because they're used to blooming longer down south, and then it actually has screwed up some migration patterns with some of the butterflies. So it is, and they're also just going to survive, they'll die. So they're going to survive more if they were grown in a local climate. They're just going to do better. And that's why it's important. Let's see, did I miss anything? No. Okay. So when you go to don't be afraid to ask the nursery. Ask them ask questions and request the plants that you want. And thank goodness there's a lot of new nurseries popping up, and a lot of people are growing quality plants now. So we're lucky. It's a good time right now. Okay, so I did want to explain a little bit about cultivars. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not, and you really should look it up before you go, because there have been problems. So, so this is an example. There's many cultivars, actually. Most of the plants in the nursery are cultivars. It's very hard to find straight species. So this one is cardinal flower Lobelia cardinalis, which is the straight species. We grow that. And then there's a cultivar called Fan Scarlet, which is supposed to have like really bright, vivid flowers. But a recent study did show that the nectar that the cultivar had was a lot less than the straight species. So actually the hummingbirds are not getting all the nectar that they need, and they're flying around trying to make up for it in other places, and then they get exhausted, and it's not good for them. So a lot of the cultivars actually aren't that great. And the ones that aren't actually is on the bottom there, the double flowers. The double flowers are actually a mutation in the plant that people have copied, and it really is the reproductive parts turned into petals, and that's the double flower. So the double flower is sterile. So they don't make pollen and they don't make nectar. So they give nothing. It's like having a plastic plant in your yard. They give nothing for pollinators. And then also they're finding that the leaf color, if you see plants with darker red leaf color, insects actually don't like it, because the anthocyanins, I can never say it, anthocyanins, I'm not even gonna try, I'm butchering it. Anyway, the color is not tasteful to them. But if you look up studies at Mount Cuba Center, they do a lot of research on the different cultivars. So look that up. But they have shown that some cultivars do attract more pollinators. So they're not all horrible. And in small gardens, if you have, you might have to put a compact version in, because if there's no room for a huge tree and you want to grow one, then that's okay. Height doesn't seem to make as much of a difference. And then it might be the only one available, and you might not be able to find any other. So that's at least better than an exotic plant. Okay, and then another word about plants at the nursery is a lot of plants you get are probably clones. So this was a field trip I went on in my greenhouse studies, and it was shocking. It was like acres and acres and acres of poinsettias in greenhouses. It was an unbelievable sight. But anyway, the reason that they're so consistent is because they use cuttings, and cuttings are clones. They're the tissue culture or cuttings are from the same plant. It could be just from like one plant. And so all of those plants have all the same genetics. So if those were a native plant that were grown from a tissue culture or cutting, and they're sold out and put out into the landscape, if something happens with the climate that changes and that one genetics doesn't like it, they're all going to die. So that's why seed propagated plants are so important, because the seeds have more genetics to them because they're from the seed from the plant, and the pollinators are moving from plant to plant, mixing up all the genetics, and then the seed from that plant is going to have more than just the one genetic from the mother plant from the cutting. So that's why it's important to get seed propagated plants, and they're going to have more of a chance to survive our climate change, and the species will have more survival rate because they just have more genetics. Okay, so how do we put in a new bed? This was my pandemic project, and what I did is I did this one. I did actually have somebody cut off the grass, like scalp the grass. I've done it myself before, and I'm going to show you another way that you don't have to do that. But I did that and just put in as many plants. Those are all plants that I grew, actually, that I propagated over the winter. And I put in as many plants as I can. And then but you see it's mulch. I'm moving away. I'm not using mulch. It's just the first year or two. You kind of have to, because otherwise it's going to be all weeds. And then I also put in a lot of annuals. You'll see in the middle picture, there's some, I'm not sure which annuals. I put in a bunch. And so to hold the place. And that way they're not going to, eventually the annuals will die out when the perennials take over. And in between the big bunches of flowers, I did put grasses in between. So I'll put 3 or 5, like either little blue stem or purple lovegrass or prairie dropseed. You can use sedges, any kind of native grasses you can find, because they're lower and they're in between the big flowering perennials. So that, and then I left it all over the winter, and that's what it looked like just recently. A lot of my pictures are from the fall. These ones I have.
It's me. I'm coming in.
Oh,
Okay, I got more food.
oh.
It'll be good for you.
So anyway,
It's just me. It's just me. I'll be over here.
So let me go to the next. Okay. So now here's an easier way, where the one on the left used to be my kids' trampoline, and it got ruined in a storm. So instead of putting grass there, I was like, hey, that's an opportunity for a garden bed. And I put in a bunch of blue wood aster, actually. You can't see it there because it's the fall. And then I just put leaves around it. And so now that's what it's going to be. I'm not putting more grass on. And then the one in the middle is actually a transplant. It's a pagoda dogwood that I got from actually Bedford Audubon. He had extra that he was getting rid of, and I went and grabbed it. And all I did was dug a hole in the ground, put the plant in, and then those are grass clippings from the lawn that I just put around it so that I could see where it was. And then to the right, I put in blueberry and bay leaf. And all I did with that was I dug the hole, I put the plant in, the shrub, and then I put cardboard actually around it and leaves on top of the cardboard. And I just wanted to show you, because the leaves blew off right there, the dark dirt, that was just from the cardboard disintegrated. And so that's what's left. I'm going to put the leaves back on. It just blew off in the winter, but I'm going to put them back on. So it really is that simple. And it's, nothing's like perfect looking. I actually was just on a Zoom webinar, and the landscaper said something that I loved. He said, our gardens are now gloriously imperfect, just like us. And I love that, because it's true. They're messy, but they have a lot of ecological function. And they really, I actually like the messy look now. I don't like that clean cookie cutter look. It kind of, I don't like it. So anyway, I did these myself. They're very easy. And then how do you clean up? You don't have to. I don't do anything. I mow the leaves into the lawn, and then that tree picture, all the extra ones where there are too many, I just leave them, and I even like put them around the tree. The insects actually, when they pupate and overwinter, they drop from the tree right down to the ground. So if you blow your leaves around, you're actually killing all the insects that you just planted all these plants to attract. So you're doing opposite of what you want. And the insects actually do overwinter in the stems as well. At the farm, we were looking at the mugwort because we were deciding whether to cut it in the winter or wait until the spring. And one of our ecologists took some of the mugwort and he actually cut open the stems, and there were insects overwintering in there. So we're going to wait until the spring to mow it down. I just love that sign there. It's just making it fun. Like, why are all the sticks left up? Well, that's why. And then the picture to the right is actually at the New York Botanical Gardens, the edible garden. And I just took a picture to show that it's beautiful to leave everything up. So I leave all my perennials up. I cut them down. If at all, I cut them. I always think that the stems are actually like natural stakes. They hold the next plant up. And if I do, I break some of the stems I wait until I think like May, late, and I just kind of break them up and leave them on the ground. I don't really move them at all. And then I just wanted to show you the same garden that I put in. That's it now. So there's leaves all over it, and I'm just going to leave it that way. And then everything's going to come up under it. You don't have to do anything. Nice and easy. And then this is very important, is to join your local pollinator pathway. This is our town to the left. Every year we do a planting and a cleanup in town, and we're trying to put only native plants in. And everybody seems to love it. Families come out, they have a great time. Also the pollinator pathways, most towns have them now. I think your town does. And they connect all the corridors that we were talking about. And you could put your property on the map and get one of those great signs. And the picture to the right, I love, that was in Fairfield. I was just taking a walk with my dad one day. And I was like, that's awesome. I love those plants there. Okay, so I just want to take like 1 minute to talk about what we actually do at Hilltop. Hopefully you'll understand now about the genetics and the biodiversity. So what we do is we have a botanist go collect seeds from the wild of wild local populations, and then they bring them back to the farm. We grow out the plants, and then we put them in the plot, in founder plots they're called, which are actually seed plots, like that Joe Pye weed that you see in the picture. And then we grow them out, and it brings pollinators to the farm, which all the crops need for pollination to get better crops. And it also brings beneficial bugs to the farm, all the different plants. And then we grow the seed, and we actually collect the seed, and we are giving them to the Eco 59 project, which is they have seed and they sell seed that's from the ecoregion. And I think I have a slide. Yeah, the next slide, it shows our ecoregion. And so we grow out the seed, and then we use that seed to grow the plants that we sell to the community. So the plants that you get from Hilltop, they're from seeds collected from the wild. So they're the wild genetics, and we're saving the local flora like that. And it's basically a living seed bank at the farm. And here's our ecoregion. So we're the northeastern coastal zone. You can't see it here, but if you look it up, the EPA Ecoregion Map, you'll be able to see it. So it basically, they determined it with just the same geography, soil, climate. We have all the same types of climate and temperature and everything. So the plants will just do better because they're used to your area. So what are local ecotypes? So we just said that they evolved in with the local insects from before, and that they're adapted to our area. And they just do better in the same environmental conditions, and they're called local ecotypes. So if you hear that, that's what it is. And then why? We're protecting our natural habitat and supporting biodiversity. That's the local provenance plants. That's another way of saying it. They're just the local ecoregion. They provide food for the insects, which we talked about, and the insects are dependent on them for survival. And they increase the resilience of the species because of the genetically diverse seeds, and hopefully survive during climate change. And they're easy to grow and they're beautiful. So that's it. How do you use them? You can use them anywhere in any garden, just like any other plant you put in all your gardens. And then here is the, oops, wait, there's the page that I said had all the references.
Great, thank you,
So,
Emily.
yeah, so that's it.
Yeah, these links are terrific. So I want to remind everyone, we're very happy to take questions. You can either unmute yourself and ask directly, or you can put questions in the chat. And I guess one of the things I think is helpful for people to think about, I can't really see if anyone's unmuting themselves to ask a question, but I guess I would be curious. So when I first started gardening, you know, we bought the house and it had a nice perennial garden, and I was very hesitant about doing anything different or new because I didn't know what I was doing, which now I realize if you're a gardener, you never really know what you're doing. You're just constantly experimenting, which is the fun part, really. But I eventually, I put in new beds like you did. But one of the things I think would be helpful for people to hear is, I mean, what are some of the native plants that are kind of easy to just start sneaking into your existing beds? You know, maybe the better behaved ones, or the ones that kind of blend with whatever you have now, or because I think one thing that people find intimidating is the idea that it's sort of all or none, that you either have to like bulldoze everything and start over and put in only natives, or you're stuck with your, you know, non-natives forever and ever. But I think there's ways to do this incrementally, but I'd love to get some, I don't know, like top 5 native plants that you can sneak into your, you know, garden, whatever it happens to be.
Okay. Yeah, no, actually that happened to me too. In my house, when we moved in, there was already a garden there. And so what happened is that a lot of stuff started dying one by one, and probably because I wasn't taking care of it, because a lot of the plants that aren't native do need care. And so when they would die, I would replace them. As I started learning more, I would replace them with native plants. And let's think. Penstemon, I know, is a fabulous. That's a spring. You want to have some from the spring, summer, and fall. Penstemon.
Spell it. Spell it.
What?
Oh,
Spell
it's PENSTEMON.
Yeah.
And actually in the chat, I put a link to where on Hilltop Hanover's website it lists the native plants they sell. So that's actually a useful reference for, I think, a lot of the plants that Emily will be likely to mention as well. So that's a great reference.
Yeah, and there's also, they do have lists of plants that are what are they called, where they do the most for all the pollinators. And so those are the ones that they're trying to focus on. And I know asters,
Oh, cool. Okay.
asters and goldenrods, because they bloom for a long time and the pollinators really love them. Another spring one is columbine, red columbine. I'm trying to think, like going spring through summer. Echinacea, I mean, echinacea is technically not local ecotype, it's further south, but it is a favorite that people love because it's pretty and it does attract a lot of pollinators. Monarda is amazing. I mean, if you go onto our site, we have a list, but any of the sites also that I gave you, if you actually, that's a great thing to do, is when you go on especially the National Wildlife Federation. And then the Audubon one, if you put in your zip code, it gives you a plant list.
Great.
Yeah, and so you can plug in your zip code and your conditions, and it gives you all the different plants. Oh, blazing star, I love. We don't sell a lot of the ecotypes. If we don't have them at the farm, it's because we haven't found a population to collect from yet. And so we're hoping to get more and more as we've already added 2 new ones for next year. And it's a slow process because we have to find the population, then we have to collect from it, and then we have to grow it out, and then we have to wait a year and then grow the plants out. So it's like, it's a long, slow process. But other nurseries have, so what did I say? Asters, blazing star, I like Monarda. I think those are the biggest ones.
Actually putting a link in the chat too. This is a great example. This is from the Westchester Land Trust's website, but it has a chart that shows when things bloom. So between spring and fall, because one of the things that I'm still learning is like a lot of the flowers you're aware of are sort of midsummer, but it is really important to have stuff all year round. And spring especially is kind of tricky because there's fewer things that are super easy to grow that bloom in spring. But this chart gives you a good sense of what some of the really great native plants are starting in May and taking you through October. Or, I mean, I have goldenrod and aster blooming through, December some years. So, but if you want to click on that link in the chat, that covers a bunch of the ones that Emily has mentioned, like penstemon and Monarda, and I personally love mountain mint.
Oh, you know what's another good spring is Zizia.
Yeah, I just planted that for the first time.
So
a year ago. It's awesome.
I have a question. So what about bulbs? A bulb like not a native? I mean, I'm assuming they're all imported.
Virginia bluebells are native, actually. Virginia bluebells, I have those. I'm not sure where they're from exactly, but yeah, a lot of the bulbs, if they attract pollinators, that's great. You know, you don't have to have everything be a native plant, but as long as there's nectar for them to eat first thing in the spring and pollen, that's what you're looking for.
So when we see snowdrops and things coming up now out there, are those native plants, or what do you consider those?
I'm not sure. Those I'd have to look up. You know what I put on the sources also is the New York Flora Atlas. And if you look up the plant you're curious about on that, it will give you a list of all the counties that they've seen it in New York. So you'll see whether, and if it doesn't show it up at all, then it's not here.
I'll put it
an interesting one.
You know, Mark Sarazin, who's going to do the beekeeping thing in July 12th, was out just before the last snow that we had, just before that snow hit, photographing bees and the snowbells.
Yeah.
And he said their legs were loaded with pollen. He couldn't imagine how they were going to fly.
See, there you go. They're feeding them.
And I do have another question. When you were talking about your own garden, and you were saying you took out the invasive species and sort of put in these other ones.
Yeah.
And Margaret, you know this as well. I don't know what Sparta weed is exactly, but
not a native. Definitely, it's
So we call it Sparta weed in our area, after our area, but it's not Sparta.
I think it's agapodium. It's gout weed.
Oh yeah, that's
a nightmare.
Yeah, that's not that. You have to dig out the bulbs from that.
Yeah.
So when I think it's hard. Somebody like me who hasn't studied this but has a garden. I inherited a garden. And something like that thrives.
I know.
And you see it come in, and it looks.
Predators. That's why there's nothing that eats it. It didn't grow. It didn't evolve with a predator. So that's why invasives have taken, some of them have taken over. They have nothing that eats it. And
so it's invasive and not native.
Well, that's an interesting question. There's sort of a debate about whether you can have natives that are also invasive, and some people get very prickly
called
about that, or
aggressive.
even things like poison ivy, which is actually a really important contributor to ecosystems, but obviously no one wants to be the president of the poison ivy fan club. But you know,
There
it's
are natives that are aggressive, like
Mhm.
mountain mint is one. And we sell it, and it's a fabulous plant. There's so many pollinators on it.
Yeah.
I would just put that in a section that can just take over. That
Mhm.
it could just go crazy. And a lot of the times I found, especially in my garden, that if it's surrounded by other plants, sometimes it'll stay in place. Some of those. But yes, native plants can be, they're not really called invasive, they're called aggressive.
Mm.
And a lot of the times you want that. You want them to just go, well, because they do have natural, they're supposed to be kept in check with the natural predators here. So,
I want to get Amy, hi Amy, had a question about are there any books you'd recommend for novices? I'm not sure, Amy, if you want
I
to
think
chime
the
in. I'm
Doug
not sure.
Tallamy one.
Yeah, so there's the Doug Tallamy books, but
Oh,
Amy, if you wanted to clarify, do you mean like a sort of hands-on how to plant stuff, or yeah, more about the big picture?
Yeah, I'm the kind of person, although I garden, I can't remember names of plants. I need like somebody to walk me through it. I forget what I've planted and then I weed them afterwards. It's just a constant, every year I have to relearn. And so just something that's kind of a really great reference that kind of takes me step by step through what I need to do to have a successful garden of native plants.
I'm trying to look. I actually think this is her new book, and she teaches classes at the Native Plant Center.
Was that Ironman, Kim Ironman?
Yeah. She's
Yeah, they
great.
sell that at Rosedale. I've seen them selling it there, I know.
Yeah. So, and I looked at, it does take you, it explains the plants. And, eventually you're just going to learn them after you look them up online a million times. And then for me, I only know plants when I actually grow them. So I'll grow them and then I know them.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
Are there other questions?
I have a specific question. Any redeeming value to hosta?
That the deer like them.
But actually, the funny thing about our particular neighborhood in Sparta is for some reason we don't have deer.
Sort of, except when we do occasionally, but they're usually drive-bys. They don't stick
Yeah.
around for.
I mean, I've seen two. We've been here about 13 years. We've seen 2 deer.
Mhm.
Wow.
And I moved from another area where we had herds of deer, so I know deer.
Okay.
But so if you don't have deer and you're talking about native plants and any redeeming, anything about pollinators, is
I'm
there
sure
anything
they feed the
redeeming about
pollinators. I mean, if they feed the pollinators, then that's
do they,
okay.
do they?
I don't, what, mine got eaten, so I didn't really look on them. Do a project this summer and look at them and see. You'll see whether they're on there or not.
Okay.
See what they attract.
I hope they attract a lot.
And don't be afraid if, like, for the Asclepiae, the milkweed family, the monarchs will devour it. Like, they literally devour the plant, and you're just like, oh my God, there's no plant left. But somehow the plant's adapted where it will come back to life and flower again, so that it produces seed for next year. So
I had swallowtail butterfly or caterpillars on fennel, but then they kept eating. I kept running back to Rosedale to get more dill and fennel and other stuff they'd eat, because I was worried that the all-you-can-eat buffet was running out. So I kept like resupplying their food. I mean, they kept coming. I hope they're fine wherever they are now, but but yeah,
another good book about if you really want to know exactly what you're feeding each insect is Heather Holmes has a book. Do I have it here?
Heather Holmes.
Here it is. She's Heather Holmes, and this goes through every single plant. Wait, let's see.
What's the title of it?
It's
I can put a link.
Pollinators of Native
Oh,
plant.
cool. I didn't know
And
about that one. That
like
sounds great.
I love this one. And actually for our descriptions, a lot of the times I'll look up because she's a scientist, she's an entomologist. And she goes through each plant and talks about exactly what insects feed on it. So if you want to make sure that the plant you're planting, she has done the studies, and she just came out with a new book on wasps. So
yeah, it's funny because some of the bugs that people freak out about, like wasps, are really important pollinators
they're
too.
good, yeah, and they're predators, so they eat a lot of the bugs that we don't want.
And I'm going to put in a plug now. So our friend Amy, who just had a great question about a good book for someone who wants to get started. She is the owner of our awesome Austining-based bookstore, Hudson Valley Books for Humanity, and she can order any of these books for you.
Oh, great.
Yep. So you can support local business while supporting your local ecosystem, which seems like a pretty good deal to me.
Yeah. But
So
the overall one, I would say, is get this, the Doug Ptolemy.
Yeah.
So I have another question. When you visit places like Phillipsburg Manor or any of the Hudson Valley historic houses that usually have gardens, what's your take on those gardens in terms of pollinators and this kind of stuff that we're talking about?
Well, I think moving forward, people are putting in more and more native plants. Like the newer plantings are all of native plant pollinator gardens. I think everybody really is starting to get committed to that. I do.
Yeah, and I'm asking that in terms of as president of the Jug, and we have a very small garden. And I sort of want to talk to Margaret and other people and think about what's appropriate to that garden, because it is sort of the gateway to this area. It's a historic area, and what would be appropriate and right.
I know a lot of the historic houses have or the cottage gardens and herb gardens that they used to have, which is fine. I mean, that's a great thing to do too.
So Phillipsburg Manor, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay.
I was going to say they recently actually secured grant funding to take out, they had massive problems with invasive Japanese knotweed, which is a nightmare, and then a bunch of other invasives, and they were able to secure funding to eradicate all that, which is a huge project. But what they're doing right now, and when it opens this spring, you can check it out, but what they've done is in this huge area that was taken over by Japanese knotweed, they planted lots of clethra, so native, really great native shrubs, native trees, and native perennials there. So I think there is more awareness, even if it's, a house museum or a historic site, that first of all, as a nonprofit in a community, they should serve the community in as many ways as possible, including the community of pollinators and insects. So I think they're trying to be good actors in that way. But then I think there is a sense that, a lot of the plants that we see now, or even the lawns, these wouldn't have existed when these buildings were originally built. I mean, they would have had kitchen gardens or herb gardens, but they wouldn't have necessarily had these sort of flat, kind of desolate lawns the way we do now. They would have been more functional landscapes, I guess.
Okay.
And a lot of people are putting in more meadows too, getting rid of or not mowing sections of their big lawns.
Maybe we should try that.
Yeah, I mean, if my yard is kind of crazy, but I'm trying to eliminate more and more. I mean, it's not even lawn at this point, but it's less work, and it's to have less space that's just lawn, and it's much more beneficial to the ecosystem. I think what's hard is learning. I certainly haven't learned this. Mine looks like a crazy jungle, but how do you make it look civilized, whatever that means, but also still be native, which is one reason why I was asking Emily to talk about, some of those easy plants, native plants that you can kind of sneak in there into a normal bed where they don't kind of take over or get too unruly. And I think the list she gave was great. If I can, maybe if we post this, I can put that in the in the caption or something, but I think also if folks follow up and come on the tour of Hilltop Hanover Farm, you can see in person some of the plants they have that are perfect for exactly that. They're kind of like the starter natives. It's like dipping a toe in the native plant waters in a way that you can start to learn about them and start integrating them in a way that doesn't feel like you have to just start your whole yard over.
Like
Yeah,
me.
or
Yeah, and I've offered, and I mean it, and but I've been to people's yards and sort of suggested, well, you might want to start with a few of these and this bed. And I mean, unfortunately, I don't have as much time as I used to, but I love doing that because there really are some simple ones that are just easy to integrate and just happy, low maintenance plants.
yeah, the tiarella, like for shadier areas, tiarella is easy. And then ferns, a lot of ferns are great. There are
Yeah.
lots of different kinds. Trying to think what else I've used. Grass, I'm starting to put more grasses and sedges in actually. Like
Yeah, I was interested about that too. So I sort of decided if there's areas of my lawn that I want to get rid of, but I can't really put sort of perennials there. I know there's Carex pennsylvanica or something.
Yeah,
Is
that's
that a good one?
yeah, that's I think a shadier area. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, my dog. But yeah, start looking up grasses. And then also what people have been doing is to have a little grassy area, they're using fine fescue instead of like Kentucky bluegrass for a lawn because it doesn't get as high and it's more manageable and it's a native grass. I think it's a warm season grass. So the lawn issue is a whole other, you can have a whole talk just about the lawn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think you guys will start growing more grasses for kind of that exact reason? I know you have a
Yeah,
few.
I mean, we have a couple, just because we've managed to find the populations, but yeah, we would love to do more grasses for sure. I know that Xerces Society is also another good resource. I didn't put them, but they did a study about mowing lawns, existing lawns. And what they found was they did a trial of every 2 weeks and every 3 weeks. And you would think that the every 3 weeks would be better, but actually they found more pollinators on the every 2 week because after every 3 weeks they thought it got a little too dense for them to forage in there. So they definitely don't want you mowing every week. I mean, every 2 or 3 weeks is better and at a higher, like so 4 inches, like even 4 inches if you can. And then there's a movement that's the No Mow May. Well, I did that last year and I ended up having a lot of talking about spring blooming flowers in the lawn. You have clover and you have self-heal and all of these flowers that come up that you would never know are there. And dandelions, and they feed the pollinators. They're in May. So if you could just hold off in mowing until like the first week of June.
And that's one reason why I think people who support the native plant movement because they want to support insects are not necessarily religious about having like 100% natives. Because for example, dandelions are not native, but they're actually an important source of food for bees very early on when nothing else is around. And most clovers aren't native to this area, but same deal. I mean, they're still really beneficial and they come up early.
Yeah, there's a lawn that's called bee friendly lawn, BE friendly lawn, and they have I think a mixture of creeping thyme and self-heal and clover, and because they're all low growing and don't really have to be mowed, and then they help the pollinators. So there's a lot of new mixtures. If you just look it up, I think Xerces Society has it on their website.
Yeah, I'm looking for it now.
Yeah. They've done a lot of studies, Xerces Society, about that. So, I mean, hopefully tell your landscaper. That's the one thing you do need to start talking to your landscapers about that. The only way they're going to start changing is if we ask for it. Changing their habits, the every week mowing and the leaf blowing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
does anyone have other questions? Okay, so again, I mean, I think it would be, I think it would be really helpful to take up Hilltop Hanover Farm on their offer to give us a tour, because it really does make a difference when you can sort of put something like this together with actually seeing the plants and talking about them in person. So for those who might have come in late, that's on June 11th, which is a Saturday at 10 a.m. And what we'll do is we'll send a reminder email and try to get a sense of how many folks might be coming closer to that date. So if you're not, if you somehow arrived here without getting an email from us, I would suggest that you go to jugtavern.org and just sign up to receive our emails, and then you can make sure you receive the information about joining us for that tour in June. And even aside from that, go check out Hilltop Hanover Farm. It's in Yorktown Heights. It's a historic farm, which is one of our tie-ins to Jug Tavern and our historic mission. But they have a great farm stand, but they also, I mean, I buy my vegetable starts there, but the native program has been extraordinary. I mean, there really is a great range of options, and they're much more reasonably priced than, I mean, one thing I've always thought was sort of funny is that you usually pay a lot more for native plants than you do for non-native plants at nurseries, which kind of drives me nuts. But at Hilltop Hanover, it really is cost effective in terms of, and also it's easier to, they sell plugs, they sell very small plants. And long ago, I figured out that that's a lot less work and digging if it's small than trying to dig something that's a 1 or 2 gallon plant that you bought from one of the big box stores. So plugs are great, and you can kind of, again, pop them in there in your existing bed and just sneak in some natives and get started that way. But yeah, Liz mentioned that she's trying to get her leaf guy to not question her sanity for her native plant friendly practices or pollinator practices. So she's trying to get less mowing, but yeah, it can be, it can be kind of a battle, but there's a lot more awareness now about people not using leaf blowers and mowing at a higher level. I mean, basically golf, if your lawn looks like a golf course, there's a problem. Okay.
Guilty.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like if you're gonna mow it.
Only part.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, Martha or Doug, do you want to close it out? I mean, my thanks to
Thank
Emily.
you. This was wonderful.
Yeah.
Just
Emily,
I took so many notes, and book lists for me are like, yay.
Yeah, and I'll try to figure out if maybe I can figure out how to put on our website some of these resources, or maybe Emily, if you want to send me your presentation, I can pull the those links you provided. I mean, there's a lot of great links out there now, but it's almost overwhelming how many there are. So I'd love to use your list if possible.
Okay. Yeah, of course.
Thank you so
Really
much.
great. We'll see you in, was it June?
June 11th.
Yeah.
Okay.
10 a.m. What time? 10 a.m.
10 a.m. June 11th, which is a Saturday.
Hopefully, some of the plots will be blooming by then.
Yeah, they will.
So,
Yeah.
I hope so.
The Columbine, yeah.
Yeah,
But no,
Columbine.
it's amazing. You'll be amazed when you see it. It's glorious. And you can buy your tomato seedlings and all the other cool seedlings too. So
Thank you.
all right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.